200 crores of fraud happens every day. Now, this is because a new tech was introduced, right? So the fraud technology will catch up to catching that fraud. Eventually, there'll be a something new which comes in, and they'll figure that one out. So fraud detection, authentication, verification is an evolving journey. So the way we look at it is largely around making sure that we are up to date on everything that happens. So when we are building our AI models, it's constantly about what we're seeing in the market and trying to build those solutions on an ongoing basis. So our models change almost every week.
A very good evening on behalf of India FinTech Forum. I am Adhar and I have Mr. Ashok Hariharan, CEO of IDfy, who has joined me to discuss about RegTech and his entrepreneurial journey. He is passionate about enabling a digital world where people can transact with each other with full confidence. A very warm welcome to India FinTech Leadership Series.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Coming to my first question, IDfy has been recognized as world's top 100 RegTech companies. What inspired you to start IDfy? What led to this success? What is the secret behind IDfy's phenomenal growth?
We started in 2011, and let me give you a little bit of context about me. Maybe that'll give a bit of a storyline around how we went about this and why we started. Right? I had a startup before this called Kaboli, and I remember in 2010 approximately we had posted a job on Naukri. In those days, if you post, shitload of people apply. Right, like 1,600 people applied, and when 1,600 people applied, 3 people applied with the same resume, exact same word for word, including grammatical mistakes. So that was one little instant where I thought like people are lying, and we interviewed them. We realized that they had just copied each other's resume, everything. That kind of gave a trigger that maybe lies and fraud and trust is something very critical for Indian economy to succeed. Right. Second big instance was when I was looking for a house in Bandra, and this very, very old lady, about 75 years old at that time maybe, and she had not given her house on rent for close to about a year or so. And in Bandra, houses go for rent very quickly, right? And so one of my friends knew her, and he said she doesn't give her house for rent at all. Always she turns people down. So let me at least talk to her. When I talked to her, it was about an hour and a half. She asked me all kinds of questions. By the way, this lady was Christian. And in the end, she came down to the point. She said, "Aapka caste kya hai?" And I said, "Hey, wait a second. How does that matter?" So then I said, "I'm South Indian," right? So she said, "Okay, house is yours." I said, "What happened?" And she said, "South Indian log jagda nahi karte." So in the absence of data and knowing about the individual, you make very suboptimal decisions around what kind of people you want to interact with. Number one. Number two, it takes a long time to make a decision because it was an hour and a half conversation because you have to feel comfortable with it. So I was sitting there thinking, virtual transactions are increasing, and the more and more like Flipkart had raised $10 million, Amazon had happened, Airbnb just about starting, Uber just about starting in the US. And I was sitting there in this world where more and more of your transactions are going to be with people you absolutely don't know. And you're like literally going to sit in their car. You're going to take a house on rent from them. You're going to sit, you might buy products from them. Authentication, trust are critical for success, right? Like that's the only way we're going to scale in what I would call the gig economy. In those days, we used to call it sharing economy. Now there's new terms for these things, but in the sharing economy where decisions are shared, where 2 people have to meet, authentication is important, right? So that's how we started. We were the first of our kind globally. Our equivalent in the US started almost 3-4 years after us on Fido, Jumio, Checker, all these guys. And so maybe we were a little too early in the market, in India especially, because India was maybe 5 years behind. So I would point out a couple of things when we talk about success. A lot of startups, I don't know if that's the right statement to make, but a lot of startups, maybe they were overnight successes because they were right time, right place. That's not us. For us, this thing was actually a market we built. India market didn't exist in the sectors that we operated in. So it was a struggle. This is not an overnight success story. This is a success over a period of time, trying to influence decisions, trying to shout at the top of your lungs that authentication is required, trust is important. And we have been fortunate to be, to have defined some of the markets in this country, including video KYC, or in the banking sector, in the sharing economy sector, when Uber started to verify that, we were the one of the few in the country who were able to do fast verifications. In the employment sector, completely digitizing employment verification and making it instantaneous was something which we have been, fortunate, and touch wood, have been very grateful for the growth that we have had. But I must say that it's not a success overnight. It's a 10-year journey.
Definitely. So my next question was, can you please explain the tech behind your AI-based verification solutions? What measures are you taking to keep your tech up to date?
So I cannot give you my secret sauce. Obviously, if I tell you that, I must kill you. So I'm not going to go into the details of the tech. But let me tell you very, very high level. Right? High level, if you look at fraud, fraud in general is an evolving space, right? Some new tech comes in, the fraudsters will figure new shit out. So you're always in a cycle of trying to figure out what is the next kind of fraud that is going to happen. Number one, if the fraud has happened, how do you quickly build solutions for it? Let me give you an example of that. In UPI fraud today, about 200 crores approximately is what the newspapers are saying. 200 crores of fraud happens every day. Now, this is because a new tech was introduced, right? So the fraud technology will catch up to catching that fraud. Eventually, there'll be something new which comes in, and they'll figure that one out. So fraud detection, authentication, verification is an evolving journey. So the way we look at it is largely around making sure that we are up to date on everything that happens. So when we are building our AI models, it's constantly about what we're seeing in the market and trying to build those solutions on an ongoing basis. So our models change almost every week. So we have a new release every week in our AI models. It's not unheard of, right? In any other sector, people work with static data. They'll run a whole analysis on data which they've collected over the last 6 months. I collect data on a daily basis to figure out what kind of new frauds are happening. So for example, we do close to about 18 million authentications a month, right? Every day we transform our models. So the only way we will succeed, only way anybody in this sector is going to succeed, is to continuously build a model which can evolve. So our way we are looking at it is pipelining data to make sure we take data which is coming in from sources to then feed it into our AI models, to then evolve our AI model over a time. So we have an AI loop that we do. Have you heard this concept called OODA? There's an old World War II concept called observe, orient, decide, and act. And for any company in our sector to succeed, it's about how fast you can circle through that loop. So that you can observe, you orient, you decide, and then you act, and then you go fast, and you go around, and your rate of your speed of going through that circle determines your success. So that's sort of how we look at it.
That's very interesting.
So by the way, if you want, you should read about OODA Loop. It's something which is very fundamental to AI.
Definitely, I would. So how does IDfy manage to overcome fake IDs in ID verification?
So let's look at fake ID, the nature of fake ID. What does a fake ID mean? At one end, am I transacting with a person who is... so first is does Ashok Hariharan exist? How do you know Ashok Hariharan exists? You have checked against NSDL or Aadhar and make sure that Ashok Narayan, a person called Ashok Narayan Hariharan exists. Right? Number two, are you transacting with Ashok Hariharan? Because maybe an Aditya is pretending to be Ashok. How will you know this? You will look at his ID proof and his selfie and compare, because you cannot, by ID proof alone, you cannot decide that. Number two, right? Second, even the ID proof can be tampered with, because when you check against NSDL, nobody sends you a photo. So I could have easily morphed my photo on my PAN card and put my photo on top as a selfie and pretended that Ashok is this person. So our validation engines are actually looking at three problems. Problem number one, does Ashok Hariharan exist? Which means, does Ashok Hariharan exist in the database? Number two, is Ashok Hariharan the guy doing the transaction? So you have to do a selfie match or a signature match and things like that. Number three, which is whether, so for example, what I might do, I want to pretend to be Ashok. Now, if I want to pretend to be Ashok, there are two things I can do. One is I present my ID card, then I take a photo of his photo in, say, Facebook. So you're still going to match the person. So now you need to know whether this person is a live person or is it a photo of a photo. So there are many ways people defraud in the ID system. And these are the three things that we catch today. Then the problem becomes another problem, right? So does Ashok Hariharan exist? Is he the one transacting? Has he committed fraud in the past? So I might be a genuine guy. I might be Ashok Hariharan and I am there, but I might be a fraudster. Obviously, people who are fraudsters have genuine IDs, right? So how do I know he has not committed fraud in the past? So we look at past data, right? Okay. Then there is the fourth one, which is the holy grail. What is the likelihood of Ashok committing fraud in the future? So how will you figure that out? Is he lying anything about anything that he's saying today? So this might be, where does he live? What kind of income does he have? So we look at the whole gamut of these four questions as a way to figure out, is Ashok Hariharan a genuine person or not? It's not just one or two things.
Wow, it's amazing. So yeah, what are the vulnerable sectors prone to fraud in India? How can the government or enterprises help to ensure more safety?
So every sector has different kinds of fraud, right? Like, for example, in the financial service sector, you might be defrauding to kind of get money, right, from the banks. So you will lie about yourself and then run away. Let's say one option. Second, you lie about you'll say that you have much more income than what you do, and then you'll default in the financial service sector. Third one, you might be a money launderer. So you create accounts, which is your UPI fraud, where you're creating a bank account to make sure that you have an UPI fraud. Right? This is your 200 crore a day fraud that happens today. Some bank account was created with very little KYC. That's why it happened.
Okay.
Right? So this is in the financial service sector. So every type of fraud requires a different type of regulation, number one. So for example, if the KYC regulation is there, and it's, by the way, India has one of the best KYC regulations in the world, right? But we have to make sure that the banks are following the rules. The NBFCs are following these things. The fintechs are not allowed to do a very simple ID check kar diya, khatam, that kind of thing. Yeah. And unless we get to this figuring out how to do carrot and stick, people are not going to do this, because in this new world, growth of your AUM, accounts under management, amount of money you're given as loans is more important. Yeah. And maybe risk is not taken as seriously as it should, right? Other than the government entities like RBI or the private banks, but in a lot of the other sectors, it is important that we take a far harder stand. Having said that, India is probably one of the best regulations in the fraud space. We are very, very as a country, we have taken a very strong stance, especially RBI. So I must say that our regulators are awesome.
Okay.
Right. So that is in the banking side. So there are three types. We need to plug the hole in each type differently. In the employment side, there's a lot of fraud happening where people are lying about what company they work for. They might there's identity theft, which is happening a lot, where somebody pretends to be Ashok Hariharan, does an account takeover of my LinkedIn account, or pretends to be another Ashok Hariharan, with a different photo, and suddenly he has a new identity. Third big fraud that happens in the employment sector is, let's say you're working with sort of very sensitive customer data. You want to make sure that these data doesn't leak, right? So a lot of people have history of fraud in the past. So you should be able to check their history around have they committed fraud in the past. So litigation checks is super important. FIR checks is super important in the employment sector. Employment checks itself is super important, right? Has he worked in this company he said he works at? Face match and liveness is super important. In today's world, in the employment side, if you must have heard this because it's there in the newspapers. There are people who are working in 9 companies simultaneously, right? Now, how do you detect that? Super important, right? Like, so there are ways to check whether the person has another employment simultaneously as he works with you. So that's super important in the employment sector. In the gig economy sector, you have to be scared about what is the past of the person you're dealing with. Let's say there's an Uber driver who's committed rape. Do you want him as a driver? Let's say there's an Airbnb host who has, again, convicted for rape. Let's take it, and I'm taking an extreme example. Let's say that's the case. Then you want to know that, right? That litigation check tells you that.
Sure.
So every sector is kind of different. I would say anywhere between about 3 to 4% to about 7-8% is the kind of fraud that happens in different sectors depending on the sector. It's how do we block these? I think companies just need to make sure that they do authentications of people that they hire, authentications of people that they give loans to, authentication of people who come into, like for example, like let's say a Flipkart delivery executive has to be authenticated. He's coming to your house, right? Somebody might be at your house. What is going to ring a bell? What if he comes in, right? Like, how do you know that this guy's the fraud there is not just about money. Like, let's say your cash on delivery, he's not going to just run away with cash. He might actually do something bad to the person who's there, right? So those things we have to be careful about. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. So coming to my next question, many financial organizations are still using old technology, including software written in obsolete or virtually extinct programming languages. Legacy systems don't often integrate with new technologies. And when they do, a lot of tweaking is necessary. What's your opinion in handling the legacy system change to the latest tech for KYC?
So we see this all the time, especially some of the in the banking sector where there's been a lot of legacy tech that they have implemented maybe 15 years ago. It's still around. What we don't see as much in, let's say, in the fintech space because it's all new, so it doesn't matter as much. A lot of the newer NBFCs, they don't have this problem, but a lot of the banking guys do, especially government banks, which are transforming, by the way, to newer tech. And so the way you deal with this is to build layers on top of our core tech to plug into those systems, right? Some of it is integrations we have pre-integrated into let's say some of the legacy products. And the moment we are pre-integrated, it's okay. It's just used very seamlessly. Second big problem is a lot of them. So we work. Our products are largely API products, right? Like in the sense people can consume it through APIs. A lot of our legacy systems cannot deal with APIs. So what we do is we have a whole front end on top. So that they can just do a front end call and we deal with all the orchestration of the APIs. So they don't have to do it. So we have built products on top to deal with the legacy infrastructure. So it's not as pronounced as it could be if we had not done some of these things. So we built a whole middleware around our product to connect to legacy tech. So we've already built that. So that helps us quite a bit, actually.
That's great. Coming to my next question. In this uncertain economic climate, where we are suffering from global pandemic for the last 2 years, what were the vital factors that have affected the RegTech industry?
So one of the things that happened, maybe it was to the positive across the world, in fact, is only positive of virus, I would say COVID. Unfortunately, not something I would wish for, if you may. But one positive is that things became more digitized, We are buying more online.
Yeah.
We are transacting more online. We are doing a lot more,
Meetings
digital
online.
meetings like we are
Yeah.
doing today. The nature of those mean that authentications need to move digital as well, right? So the RegTech industry, in fact, has probably had the highest adoption in the last 2 years because of the digitization of interactions. Think about what I said initially. If virtual transactions are going to increase, authentication needs to happen. So that's exactly what has happened in the last 2 years. And we've been a fortunate beneficiary of that. Maybe if COVID had not happened, we would have been maybe it would have taken 2 or 3 more years before we reach this spot. But today, if you look at just UPI transactions today, right? 2018, digital transactions in India were 1/5 of China. Today, we are 5x of China.
Yeah.
It just tells you the scale of what India is going through.
That's
we've
amazing.
transformed as a country, and fortunately, IDfy has been around during this time, which has given us a natural growth, obviously.
Since you're providing KYC, check authentication, and handling huge database, what steps have you taken in cybersecurity for IDfy?
See, we deal with a lot of personal identifiable data, right? So we are very sensitive about how we work with this data, right? One is work, the other one is transact. So step number one, you have to make sure the encryption is right? So we have what we would call encryption at rest and encryption in transit. Now, encryption is in 2 ways, right? One is I could encrypt with my keys, but then I can see the data, right? As IDfy. So we don't do that. What we do is we have key level encryption where a customer can encrypt his own data. So none of my people can see the data, right? So even when I store it or in transit or at rest, which is at rest in a database, even my tech team, my operations team, none of them can actually see what that data says because it's completely encrypted by the customer's encryption key, not mine.
Okay.
Right. So that's step number one. Second is about taking this identity data and moving it to a digital vault. So our vaulting structure makes sure that there's no other system other than our one system, maybe 1 or 2 systems, which can access the digital vault, even the encrypted data. Number 2. So imagine I'm taking all this data and encrypting it, and even the encrypted data, I'm putting it into a safe in a bank. Right? Imagine that's the second layer that I've added as a store until I process data. Now the third one, as soon as I process the data, I delete it.
Okay.
So we are very, very sure that so the maximum a person has any ability to see the data, even if they pass through these 3 stages, is for a minute.
Okay.
So you cannot work to it. So the hackers, right? Like you look at hacking of data, what do they look for? Like they look for permanence. Like there has to be something static and permanent in your structure. Otherwise, they cannot figure out the hacking structure. So nothing is permanent in us. We're constantly changing the keys. We're constantly changing the data set. We're constantly putting it into the vault. They're constantly deleting the data. Kuch ho nahi ho sakta.
Okay. So the next question is, since 2008 financial crisis, the world has gradually moved towards a more standardized and global approach to regulations. Since IDfy is also expanding its horizons to global market, how is IDfy going to manage different compliance requirements across abroad?
So there are 3-4 stages. Like from a compliance perspective, there's GDPR, which is your European standard. There's a US privacy standard, and there's India's privacy standard, which is called the PDP bill. PDP bill is pretty much similar to GDPR to a large extent. Most of Southeast Asia, which is where we are focusing, is either going to follow the India standard or the GDPR standard. Both of them are similar. So whatever we have done in India from a compliance perspective is going to be similar across a lot of the countries that we operate in. In fact, GDPR is probably the most stringent. Actually, that's wrong. The PDP bill is probably the most stringent. Number 2 is GDPR. Number 3 is America, right? So if I were to look at it, if I follow PDP, I'm pretty much golden across the world from a compliance perspective. GDPR probably is number 2. America, to agar India kar diya, to America ho hi gaya from a compliance perspective. Apart from that, there is the ID standards are different in different countries. Like if you look at my ID card in India, looks very different than the ID card in Philippines or in America or Europe. The databases that I need to check this data against is different. So we build localized. So what we have is what we call a scaffolding layer. So there are two problems in this, right? There's data ingestion and access to data, right? So data ingestion, we have built a structure around how do we ingest data from multiple sources in very standardized ways. So what does an ID card have? Let's say a driver's license. What does it have? It has a name, it has an address, it has a ID number, it has validity, and it has what kind of vehicles you can drive. Wherever you go in the world, and it also has which country or state you're getting that card from. That's it, right? Wherever you go in the world, it is exactly the same. So there is a certain set of standardization that you can do in the way an ID card is structured. So when I'm ingesting this data, I know that I need to look for these 6 or 7 data points.
Okay.
On a type of ID card, right? On every type of ID card. So as long as I standardize a framework, then I can ingest any kind of data on top. I just need to build modules to read those cards, to read that data source. That's it. Right? So we built some level of standardization in the way we deal with identity, the way we deal with address, and then building the layers on top is maybe a week at max, maybe a week worth of activity. So I can launch a card today. What we pride ourselves on is we can launch a new card in about 3 days, 72 hours.
Wow. That's amazing. Cool. So my next question is, tell us about your global expansion plans. How do you customize your services for different countries? In the coming years, can we see you entering the PayTech industry as well?
So we already are in there, by the way. If you look at any of the wallets in this country today, most of them use me for authentication, right?
Okay.
I don't want to name my customers, but 90% of them use me in the wallet space. So already we are in PayTech. We are already starting to look at areas where we need to authenticate payments as well. So we are looking at how do I build transaction monitoring and things like that as well, right? So that's in general. But your first question, which is how do we go to different countries? We have launched in Philippines already, and we have a few customers there. Like I said in my previous answer, that the way we have built our structure is around what I would call a layer which is similar across cards, and then building an ingestion layer and a data acceptance layer, which is the only thing that's customized. So we can launch a new country in about 3 days, approximately 72 hours, right? So that's sort of how we have built our models in IDfy, and it's replicable pretty much in any country you want.
Okay, that's great. So my last question to you is, it's been 10 plus years since you have founded IDfy. What suggestions would you like to give to the youth from your own entrepreneurial journey?
So first of all, I want to caveat that I have a huge problem when people give advice to people because everybody's journey is different, right? So my journey would be very different than anybody else's journey. So to give any advice is pretty much, I would say, probably wrong, right? It'd be like saying, okay, it's a winner of one, right? Like in a sense, you tried it in a certain way and therefore you won. Doesn't mean that everybody who tried the exact same way is going to win, right? Because circumstances are different, times are different.
Yeah.
But one thing I would take as a thread across these 11 years is for at least for IDfy, it has been perseverance. Perseverance, grit has been two things that we have completely focused on, and we persevered for 10, 11 years, right? For majority of those years, we didn't have success for maybe the first 3-4 years. It took us a long time for the regulation to catch up. So when the regulation caught up, we were maybe one of the few people left because we just survived longest.
Yeah.
So it's about how long can you last in your vision. So one is you have to believe your vision, number one. Sometimes that might be stupid also. You might believe a vision which is not really there, but in my case, it worked out. Second thing, I think, this I think is common to pretty much any long-term successful company, right, is you have to work on your company's culture. You have to make sure that people like working with you. A lot of entrepreneurs get that wrong. So most of these companies last for a very short period of time. Even if there is millions of dollars, they became unicorns. The biggest problem is culture and the way they treat their employees. It is not sustainable if you treat your employees badly. First of all, they shouldn't even be called employees. They should be called family, right? So if you treat them like family, they will stay. If you treat them like family, you build a long-lasting culture. Second, share the wealth. That it is important that you share your wealth with everyone in the org, so that there are enough people who make money from you. It is not about a one person wins all structure. So I have a huge problem when an entrepreneur owns 70% of the business and gives 5% as ESOP. No, that's wrong. Give money away. Give people the opportunity to win with you. I like to take Narayan Murthy as an example here, right? How many millionaires were created with Narayan Murthy? Right? And that's the right thing to do, because they struggled with you. Give them that. So I think culture and something is ubiquitous. Unfortunately, I think today's theme of the year is about how much can you make, but I don't think that should be the target for entrepreneurs who are starting up now. That would be, I would say, the only common theme that I would have. The other bit, I don't know what my, success is a one-man story. It is not it's not an equation.
Yeah. So that's all we have for today. I thank Mr. Ashok Hariharan, CEO of IDfy, for sharing his valuable insights on RegTech industry. Have a great week, guys, sir.
Thank you.